sometimes I don't know how to start these, and so we're just starting. But recently a friend of mine gave me some feedback, and really I felt like it was for him because he said it would help him. So, but I thought it was really helpful feedback for me in framing these podcasts and how I share information and stories I tell and things like that. So he had said how much he finds value in and appreciates learning through anecdote, and that in cases where I'm maybe conveying a story or a lesson, or trying to crystallize a thought, that to be less vague in my anecdotes, perhaps more direct, share things from my experience more directly, maybe even the specific thing that got me to that idea. He thought that would add a little more value and relatability to it, but maybe it was just for him. Either way, I thought it was useful. So I will start this one off a little vague to protect some anonymity, but I was having a conversation with somebody I really look up to for their ability to kind of like be a go-getter in that sense of constant self-improvement, really successful at changing and learning habits quickly, continuing to progress in their career, always looking for the next step. And we were just kind of catching up on these things and what's been going on in their career. And, she mentioned that she recently got a raise and ended up getting at the top end of the performance raise, X to X percent, whatever it was. And I was in my head, I was like, wow, that's really cool. And she's been working at this for a while. So I thought it was really awesome. And I admire it not just because of the outcome, but because you see the effort, you hear about the effort that gets to that outcome. And sometimes that's more impressive than actually what happens, just sticking with it, especially when things aren't easy or they take a long time. But one of the things I noticed as we were discussing this and catching up on this is that while she appeared interested that she achieved it, felt like it was a good thing, didn't seem all that wowed by it. And I don't want to say ungrateful. Didn't seem ungrateful, but certainly wasn't as grateful or appreciative as I thought she might be, or I might think I would hope to be I would hope to be if I was in that situation. And then we were kind of talking about, what's next, because that's kind of how she views things, like achievement, what's next. And I was just sort of listening this whole time and starting to pick up an air of like dissatisfaction with the fact that there wasn't a clear path to the what's next thing. And maybe even that this raise wasn't bigger. And I truly don't think this was thought of in an arrogant way. Nor do I think it was thought of in a way of, unrealistic expectation. I think it was looked at in a way of like, I've got to prove myself here. Great. I'm going to get this thing. Now I have to prove myself again. So I need to go get this thing. And I need to keep doing that. And there's a lot of value in that. It's certainly motivating. I was thinking about that today. I was doing a workout, and so the workout that I wrote, we were doing it at CrossFit Mafia. It was you had 10 minutes on the clock, and in the 10 minutes you do 250 double unders, 50 chest to bar pull-ups, and the remaining time in the 10 minutes you do as many thrusters as you can at 155 pounds, 105 pounds for ladies. And the stimulus notes, I had wrote between 20 and 40 reps, huge range. 40 is an asinine number of reps for that workout. And when I got to the thrusters, I did a single thruster. Maybe I did like two, doesn't matter. And I, dropped the bar, and I thought to myself, I had a lot of time. I had 5 minutes left. I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to get another single thruster. I felt pretty tired, worked by that workout outside of my wheelhouse right now. That's exactly why I wanted to do it. But in my head, I just, kept thinking that if I wrote something like that down on paper, if I established that stimulus, like I have a obligation to achieve, I have to hit this milestone, kind of in order to earn it. I get really stuck in that thinking sometimes. But it's so like there, I think it's kind of valuable. If I don't do this thing right now, how can I do the next thing? I think there's a lot of motivation in that, a lot of push, a lot of drive. But I also think there's a trap when you get stuck in this mindset where if you don't appreciate the accomplishments that you have right now, even if you have your eyes set on the next thing, I think you set yourself up not to be able to appreciate the ones that the accomplishments you're going to make later on. And this becomes this really vicious cycle. I think this even goes back to the that quote we talked about from Jay Vera a long time ago. If you have too much purpose without value, you have a crisis of meaning. And I feel like this is what we're talking about right here, is that just this idea, got to accomplish the next thing. Got to get the next thing. Oh, this thing that I got now, it's not enough. I got to get something else. And like I said, a lot of motivation there. Keeps you moving to like earn every day, to have that concept in mind of like good isn't good enough. But again, I think the pitfall of this is this notion that like if you simultaneously, while you're doing that, while you're being motivated that way, if you're not appreciating the accomplishments that you've achieved right now, even if you have your eyes set on bigger ones, more in the future, you are setting yourselves up to not be able to appreciate those. And I think what's risky about that is you set yourself down this path of really not understanding what you've done so far. And, the cliche of like, stop and smell the roses, this is it. You don't need to stay there forever. But I think if you miss that chance or get out of that habit of appreciating the accomplishments you've done so far, you also will simultaneously not really understand what are the good and bad skills that got you there. How do we make them truly better to get to the next step? And the other downside, the other downside of this is I think it puts you out of touch with yourself. Here's the anecdote for you, friend. I spent the better part of from 2009 to 2016 doing some other things, but a lot of that time was aimed at competing in CrossFit. And I mean, that was my whole life, coaching CrossFit, competing in CrossFit. I still am to some extent, but was the joke that the only problem with CrossFitters is they never stopped talking about CrossFit. That was me. It had really, worked its way through every corner of my life. I was coaching it full time. I was traveling on seminar staff. And when I finished competing, I was pretty, how do I put this? When I finished competing, like really competing for the purpose of winning the CrossFit Games back in 2016, I was pretty disenfranchised. I looked back from 2016 to, 2009 when I started competing, 2007 when I started coaching CrossFit. So pretty long time, 7 to 9 years respectively for the competing and the coaching. And I felt like I had nothing to show for it. And I've talked about this advice before, but I think it's worth repeating here, and it rings really true. And especially in this case of talking about this friend and her view of making this achievement of getting a raise, improving herself in the job, looking for what's next. But I found myself when I stopped competing pretty just disenfranchised, and I would talk to people. People ask, well, what are you going to do next? Like, what do you want to be involved in? And I kept saying things like, well, all I can do is CrossFit. That's all I've done. That's it. I don't know what else to do. I don't have any other skills. And I, like, no shit, was pretty mad at myself and frustrated with myself for only focusing on CrossFit, for only focusing on competing, for only focusing on coaching. Actually, not even pretty mad at myself. I was really pissed. And for whatever reason, I had extracted all the value out of my almost decade of experience in those two things. Don't know how I did it. Still to this day, don't know why I felt that way. Have some ideas, have done some thinking on it, talked to different people about it. But the point is, I had spent devoted a lot of time and effort, and a lot of time and effort that other people look up to, inspired by. Not even if it's from me, but you see somebody else who spends that much time committing themselves to something. It's inspiring. It lifts you up, even if it's not the same subject matter you want to do. And I really look down on it big time. I looked down on these accomplishments because I felt they were so homogenous. It was all just the same thing. Like, how could it be any good? I'm a one-trick pony. I only have a single skill. And as I started to look at different career opportunities, other things I wanted to do, I reached out to another friend and was asking her for advice. And she said to me, and I really, really liked this. She said, okay, you've been in CrossFit for X amount of time. Fantastic. There's a sign of commitment there, dedication. There's a lot of discipline. I said, cool. Yeah, I know that. But, that stuff only gets you so far on a resume. Or getting the foot in the door. And she said, well, you know what? She said, along the way, because even if you've only been in this one realm, she says, you should just go write down a list of what you've done in that time. And then what are the skills you've learned in order to do those things? And I thought, man, and that was at first I was like, this is like one of those stupid 30-day gratitude exercises. Like, who gives this shit? What am I going to know right now? All I know is that I've spent 10 years doing this thing and it's been a waste of fucking time because I have nothing to show for it at this point. And man, that was such a bummer I had that view. And I carried that view for a while. And I think still sometimes I get sucked into that viewpoint. It's a black hole viewpoint. It's not a good place. But anyway, I did this exercise. I did what she told me. I wrote it all down. I said, what have I learned along the way? And, she said, not just, she said, what are the specific skills you've picked up from doing these things? And then you go and look at it. And, my time spent coaching on seminar staff, spent coaching. You start talking about like group management, study skills, presentation skills, communication skills, organizational skills, all that kind of stuff. Coached in, ran, owned affiliates. And I started looking at, even the goofy ones. I was never fantastic at social media, don't think I ever will be for various reasons, but I learned a lot throughout that time trying to be a competitive athlete in the space, interacting on social media, talking to sponsors, trying to get deals with sponsors, negotiating contracts. And by the time I had really actually looked at what the heck had happened, and this doesn't even entail like the people that I was fortunate enough to impact or get to meet along the way. By the time I had gone through this exercise of, okay, yes, I've spent a lot of time in a single space. I felt like I've committed a lot of time to this one single thing. Mainly that was competing. The other half of that was coaching. But when I look at all the skills I learned along the way and got to hone and refine and practice, it was, it made me more important than be able to put myself out there and say, hey, look at me. It made me appreciate, again, what I had accomplished. And what was really interesting is when I was in that mode of, man, I can't believe I spent 10 years doing this one single thing, and what do I got to show for it? I can't go do this career. I can't go do that career. When I was in that mode, it was very hard for me to pay attention to and appreciate the other things that were happening around me. Starting a new business, starting a new life and relationship with somebody that I would, eventually get married to. There were so many other things that I had such a hard time appreciating because there was this huge part of my life that I either had some expectation around or whatever, it didn't matter. But there was this huge part of my life, like I just stopped appreciating the accomplishments associated with it because maybe I thought they should have been more. I should be able to do something different, or who knows. But as soon as I went through this exercise that my friend shared with me and, kind of wrote down the skills along the way, really what it was an exercise in appreciation. I was able to appreciate so much about what I had put into it, what I had extracted from it, the things I had learned along the way, the people I've interacted with along the way. And as soon as that happened, I started appreciating other things in my life. And like I said, I think there's a black hole, there's a bad habit here, there's a little bit of a spiral. But when I think about this friend and, she just achieved this really cool promotion. And it's awesome that this is not the end all for her. Like I said, that's inspiring that she wants more. But what I worry about is that she gets to the next thing and it's just like, well, what's next? And I think at some point, a couple of things happen. When you stop appreciating things, at some point, I think it takes the motivation away. I don't know, just a guess. And again, another thing is that like it really, the gravity of it pulls you away from being able to accurately self-assess yourself. And I'll tell you this too, your life is a whole hell of a lot better when you appreciate the things that you do. You don't need to go around. You don't need to blow them out of proportion. You don't need to tell everybody on Instagram every single day you have a great accomplishment. But being able to truly appreciate the work you put in to achieve a goal or accomplishment is, there's a lot of value there, not just for that single one, not just to make you feel good, but for those future things that you want to go out there and get. So that's where my head was at. Hope that anecdote was anecdotal enough. Anyway, more tomorrow. Appreciate you.